Let's talk about a few different ways that people are using to judge the power of their character, and also a few really big mistakes that people are making when it comes to these things. And I'm talking about gear score, your attack rating, and the enchantment level of your weapon. All three of these things we can take a look at in your character sheet. So let's go over what these are going to do for your character, how you can end up getting these things and increasing them, and also some of the mistakes that people are making when it comes to these three different things. So let's start off with gear score, because this is probably going to be the most commonly used one. It's also going to be the one that the game has an actual requirement for when it comes to dungeons. You're going to need a certain gear score to run normal dungeons, hard mode dungeons, and even upcoming in the future chaos raids. You'll probably see in the world chat for hard mode dungeons, which require a gear score of 2,100, people saying things like looking for DPS hard mode dungeons 4,500 plus gear score. Well, let me talk a little bit about how you can increase your gear score and why those people might not necessarily be doing the right thing in order to actually get more geared and stronger players in their party. So there's going to be two things in particular that are going to increase the gear score of your character. First of all is going to be increasing the quality of your gear. Replacing your greens with blues and replacing your blues with epics. That will increase your gear score. And the next thing is going to be enchanting your gear. Whether it's your weapon or whether it's your armor, enchanting your gear is going to give you a percentage of gear score based off of the original gear score that that piece has. So this is why most people are enchanting their weapon, but there's also a lot of other really important reasons. But the weapon has the most amount of gear score, 1149. Now you see that number in parentheses, 574? That's going to be the amount of extra gear score that I'm getting on my character based off of the enchantment levels of the weapon. And as you keep enchanting it, you're going to get more and more gear score points based off of the original gear score that it has. So enchanting your weapon is going to give you the most amount of raw gear score points, but it's also going to be the most costly. If you were to go ahead and enchant a piece of gear like your gloves, because gloves only have a base 68 gear score, you're going to get a lot less gear score points by enchanting your gloves. You might get your gloves all the way up to plus 10, for example, and you're probably only going to get 30 to 40 points of gear score. So every single piece of armor is going to have a different base gear score. You've got your weapon, which gives you the most. You've got your chest and your pants. Then you've got your hat, 241, and then gloves and boots, which end up giving you the least. But just because certain pieces of gear end up giving you more gear score doesn't mean that it's going to increase the power of your character that much. First of all your armor is mostly going to end up being defensive stats. So you can end up increasing the gear score of your character without actually increasing your damage. And a great example of that is simply by enchanting your armor. I mentioned in the video something which I don't think I clarified very well. Something along the lines of enchanting your armor is mostly to just increase your character and look flashy. That probably wasn't the best way of saying that. What I meant to say by that is if you are a newer player, somebody who's closer to the 2100 gear score, maybe even in the low 3000s, it's going to be a lot more of a benefit for you to spend the resources that you have enchanting your weapon. Because not only is it going to give you a lot of gear score points, but it's also going to give you a lot of damage and just overall a lot more benefit to your character. Enchanting your armor is more of an advanced player thing. It's going to be very costly, very expensive. It will increase your gear score, and it will give you some defensive stats, but for people who don't have as many mesos or as much time to play the game or just as many resources, it's going to be more benefit for you to end up enchanting your weapon, and you really do want to focus on your weapon first before you end up focusing on your armor. But you can get gear score points and plenty of them without actually increasing the damage of your character. And also, just because you have a really, really high gear score doesn't mean that that character is that much better. So, best example I can use for this is take a character that has a gear score of 5,000 and then take a character that has a gear score of 2,500. Now, the player with the gear score of 5,000 has twice the gear score as the 2,500 player, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be doing twice as much damage, or that doesn't mean that they're twice as good of a player. Don't take the actual exact gear score amount too seriously. It's just a general measurement of your actual gear, how enchanted it is, and that's it. X amount or a certain number of extra gear score points does not mean that your character is that exact same amount better than somebody else. And now let's talk about the next thing, which is going to be your attack rating. Now, there's a lot of similarities between your attack rating and your gear score, and a lot of the problems that I mentioned with gear score are also true for attack rating, except the thing with gear score is it's not just going to be your offensive and your attack stats, it's also going to be your defensive stats. So you can end up increasing your gear score without increasing your damage in any way at all. The attack is a little bit different. It's just going to be a measurement of your offensive abilities, but just like gear score, you can end up increasing your attack a whole bunch of points and not gain a whole lot of damage. And a great example is something I ended up talking about in the video yesterday, which I didn't phrase very well. So let me rephrase it at the end of the video yesterday. For those of you guys who watched it, I mentioned an example with your attribute points and your main stat and critical rate. So let's take a look at this again, and hopefully I can explain it a little bit better. So I have 4,230 attack right now, and I'm going to put all of my points into intelligence. And you'll notice that my attack rating is going up a little bit, but it's not going up a whole lot. It's going to go up by about 35 to 40 points. Now, if I reset my attributes, which you can always do for free at any time, so feel free to experiment with this yourself, you can go ahead, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to put my points into my critical rate, and you'll see that I'm gaining a whole lot of extra attack from putting my points into critical rate compared to my intelligence. But just because I'm gaining a whole lot of extra attack doesn't mean that this is going to be a direct measurement of the extra power that I'm getting on my character. So if I were to get, say, 50 attack points by putting my points into intelligence, and then 200 attack points by putting my points into critical rate, that's 4 times more attack than I'm getting by putting my points into critical rate compared to putting my points into intelligence. So you might think that I'm getting a 4 times increased DPS rate by putting my points into critical rate than increasing my intelligence, and that is not true. Same with gear score. Every single point of attack doesn't necessarily mean that your character is going to be that much stronger. All it's really good at is a baseline measurement of the power of your character. If you have a character with an attack rating of 2,500, and then you have a character with an attack rating of 5,000, the player with the attack rating of 5,000 is going to have twice the attack as the person with 2,500, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be doing twice as much damage. They should be stronger than the person with 2,500, but it's going to be really, really hard to know exactly how much stronger they are unless you go ahead and do exact testing yourself on training dummies. So they're a good way to measure the overall representation and power of your character, but don't take it at an exact amount. You have to do testing yourself in order for you to get the exact numbers. And the last thing that I want to end up talking about is the enchantment level of your weapon. And this is something people are starting to talk about a little bit more. And I wanted to mention this because once you get past a certain point, enchanting your weapon is going to be the biggest DPS increase that you can end up having on your character in one specific way. The amount of extra damage that you gain on your character by enchanting your weapon past a certain point is very, very significant. If you compare a player that has a weapon that's enchanted to plus 10 compared to somebody who has a weapon enchanted to plus 13, the person with the weapon enchanted to plus 13, they will gain a little bit of extra gear score points. They'll probably have around 300 or so extra gear score points, but you gain a huge DPS increase by enchanting your weapon to 13 compared to a person who only has their weapon enchanted to plus 10. Which is why a lot of people are going around now in the world chats looking for people who have a weapon enchanted at a certain level in order to run certain content. The thing is, though, you're only looking at one piece of gear, and while the weapon is going to be your biggest source of damage, it's still not taking a look at all the other pieces of gear and sources of damage that you have on those. You could have really good accessories and jewelry that have really, really good sockets that also give you an insane amount of damage. You could have perfect bonus attributes on all of your gear with a ton of piercing and attack speed and elemental damage for an element that you use and just really, really good stats, but you might only have a weapon that's enchanted to plus 10. Then you have a player that has a weapon that's plus 13, but if you take a look at their accessories, they have no sockets unlocked like mine, and then all their bonus attributes are just not really that good. And you're confusing yourself by only looking at one thing in particular, which is what I wanted to end off the video, because the weapon is a great example of why all of these systems are flawed if you only look at one of them in particular, is because looking at one of these numbers in particular is not going to give you a good representation of the power of any character. Each thing kind of tells you different things about a character, but just looking at one of them is not going to tell you everything that you need to know about a character's power and usefulness. You have to take a combination of all of these things and look at them individually and kind of judge characters' gear on their own in order to get a good representation of the power and the usefulness of a character. So that's probably the number one most common mistake that people are using with all three of these different things, is none of them in particular are going to tell you everything you need to know about a character. And even if you take a look at all three of them, you also have to take a look at the bonus attributes of gear, the sockets that people are having on their accessories, And even then, every character is going to do different damage amounts. If you do individual testing at training dummies, numbers on these spreadsheets, they are always going to have their problems and they're always going to have their flaws. So the thing that I want to end up leaving this video off is, if you're going to use these numbers, don't look at them too seriously. Use them as a good baseline and just a good way to tell apart people. If the numbers are really, really far off, you know, if you're comparing somebody with 5,000 gear score to 1,900 gear score, or you're comparing somebody with 5,000 attack to 1,500 attack, that will tell you a little bit. Or if you're comparing somebody who has a +2 weapon to a +15 weapon, that'll tell you a lot. But you have to take all of these things into account and also look at that person's gear individually to truly get a really, really good sense of the power and usefulness of their character. So hopefully this helped out a little bit. I know it was a bit more complicated in detail video, but I wanted to talk about this a lot because I've been seeing a lot of people in the world chats arguing about this kind of stuff. So hopefully me making a video helps out just a little bit. I know there's plenty of other things that I could have mentioned. This is obviously a very complicated thing that you could spend hours and hours talking about, but I did my best to include as much information as I could in about 10 to 12 minutes. So if you guys enjoyed this video and you learned a little bit and it helped out, consider leaving a like. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing as well. We did pass 12,000 subscribers, so a big thank you, everyone. And what a crazy last 10 days it has been. And as I always mention at the very end, if you're interested in the October giveaway, which now ends in just a couple of days, link is in the description. All you have to do is be a subscriber for 2 tickets, leave a like or comment for a bonus ticket for 3 tickets and 3 chances to win. The winners will be posted on my Twitter, in the Discord server, and I'll also mention them in a video early on in the month of November. So with this all being said, thanks again for watching, have a great day, and until next time, this is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.